It was a sweltering afternoon in the bustling town of Abeokuta, Nigeria. The air smelled of roasted corn and petrol fumes, typical of a day when life hummed loudly in the streets. Vendors shouted their wares. Children played soccer with a deflated ball, and mothers sat under trees braiding hair. Amid the vibrant chaos, a young boy, Tund, no older than 10, was reluctantly being dragged by his mother to their neighbor's house. Tund, stop dragging your feet, chair," his mother scolded, balancing a basket of vegetables on her hip. Her wrapper swayed as she walked briskly toward the tall, whitewashed bungalow at the end of the street. "But Mummy, I don't want to go to Auntie Ada's house," Tund murmured, his voice barely audible. His mother stopped abruptly, turning to look at him. "Why not? You love staying with her. She always gives you biscuits and Fanta, Abby." Tund hesitated. He couldn't explain why he felt uneasy around Auntie Ada lately. She was always so kind to him in front of his mother, but there was something about the way her smile lingered when they were alone that made him want to run. "I just don't want to go today," he said finally, his eyes fixed on the ground. His mother sighed. "Tund, I have to go to the market. Then there's nobody else to watch you. Auntie Ada is like family. She's even the one who helped me when you had chickenpox last year." "Don't be ungrateful." Before Tund could respond, the wrought iron gate creaked open, and Auntie Ada stepped out, beaming. She was a tall woman with smooth, chocolate-colored skin and a commanding presence. Her brightly patterned Ankara dress swayed as she approached. "Ah, my darling Tund," she exclaimed, kneeling slightly to meet him at eye level. "Why are you looking so sad? Don't you want to spend time with me?" Tund forced a smile and mumbled, "Good afternoon, Ma." His mother smiled, relieved. "Ada, thank you so much. I'll be back before sunset." Auntie Ada placed a hand on Tund's shoulder and gave it a slight squeeze. "No problem, Funk. Tund is in safe hands." As Tund watched his mother walk away, he felt an inexplicable knot tighten in his stomach. Cliffhanger start. A dark secret. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the quiet street, Tund's mother returned. She was greeted by silence. The house was too quiet, eerily so. "Where's Tund?" she asked, stepping into the living room. Auntie Ada appeared from the kitchen, her face carefully composed. "Oh, he's just upstairs. He wanted to rest for a bit," she said, her voice calm. But something about the way Auntie Ada spoke unsettled. "Funk." Her tone was light, but her eyes flickered with something Funk couldn't quite place. Ignoring the discomfort rising in her chest, Funk called out, "Tund, come down, oh. Let's go home." There was no answer. "Tund," she called again, louder this time. Still silence. Funk turned to Auntie Ada, frowning. "Where exactly is he?" "He's not the type to ignore me." Auntie Ada chuckled nervously, smoothing the folds of her Ankara dress. "Ah, Funk, calm down. You know how children are. He was probably tired and fell asleep in my room. Let me check." Funk's frown deepened as she watched Auntie Ada ascend the stairs, her movements unnaturally slow. A sense of unease crept over her like a cold fog. She waited, her ears straining for any sound. Moments later, Auntie Ada called from upstairs. "He's here, Funk." "He's sleeping." Funk, relieved but still uneasy, began climbing the stairs. "Sleeping? By this time?" "Uh-huh. I hope he's not sick." She pushed open the door to Auntie Ada's bedroom, and there he was, Tund, lying on the bed, his face turned to the wall. "Tund, let's go," Funk said gently, touching his shoulder. He flinched. "Tund?" she said, her voice sharper now. "What's wrong with you?" Tund slowly turned, his eyes red and brimming with tears. "Mummy, let's go home," he whispered. Funk's heart sank. She pulled him close, wrapping him in her arms. As she did, her eyes caught something on the bedside table, a bottle of baby oil, uncapped. Her blood ran cold. "Ada," Funk said, her voice tight. "Why is this here?" She held up the bottle. "Oh, that?" Auntie Ada laughed nervously. "I was massaging his legs earlier. He said they were hurting after playing football." Funk's grip on Tund tightened. Her instincts screamed that something was off, but she couldn't confront Auntie Ada without knowing the full truth. She stood abruptly, pulling Tund up with her. "We're going home," she said firmly. The weight of silence. That night, Funk noticed Tund wasn't his usual cheerful self. He barely touched his dinner and avoided her gaze. She tried to probe gently. "Tund, are you feeling okay? Did something happen at Auntie Ada's house?" He shook his head, his eyes glued to his plate. "Nothing, Mummy." But Funk wasn't convinced. She decided to let it go for the night, hoping he would open up when he was ready. The next morning, Tund refused to get out of bed. He clung to his blanket as if it were a shield. And when Funk pressed him, he finally broke down. "Mummy," he began, his voice trembling. "Auntie Ada, she made me do things." Funk froze. Her heart pounded as if it would burst from her chest. "What things, Tund?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, tears streaming down his face. "She said it was a game, but I didn't like it. She made me touch her, and she touched me too." Funk's world shattered in that moment. Rage, guilt, and sorrow swirled within her. How could she have trusted Auntie Ada? How could she have been so blind? Without waiting another moment, Funk stormed out of the house, heading straight to Auntie Ada's. She didn't knock. She barged in, her voice echoing through the house. "Ada, Ada, come out here now." Auntie Ada appeared, startled. "Funk, what's the meaning of this?" Funk's voice was trembling with fury. "You touched my son. You!" She couldn't even bring herself to say the words. Auntie Ada's face darkened. Hunk. What are you saying?" "Me? Touch your son? How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" But Funk wasn't backing down. "Tun told me everything. You're a monster, Ada. You think you can get away with this? You'll answer for what you've done." Auntie Ada's calm facade cracked for a moment, her eyes narrowing. But before she could respond, neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. As the crowd grew, murmurs spread like wildfire. Some looked at Auntie Ada with disbelief. Others whispered about past incidents they had dismissed as mere rumors. Just as Funk was about to call the police, a young girl stepped forward from the crowd. She couldn't have been older than 13. Her voice trembled as she said, "Auntie Ada, she did the same thing to me." Gasps filled the air and Auntie Ada's face turned pale. The truth was unraveling, and the community was about to face a reckoning. The air grew thick with tension as neighbors whispered among themselves, their faces a mixture of disbelief and horror. The young girl who had stepped forward, Amaka, stood trembling, her eyes darting to her mother, who was now clutching her chest in shock. Funk stepped toward her, her voice gentle but firm. "Amaka, what do you mean? What did she do to you?" Amaka hesitated, her lips quivering as tears began to flow. "She said it was a secret game. She told me not to tell anyone. She did things to me too." The crowd erupted in murmurs, some people exclaiming in disbelief while others shook their heads. Their suspicions now confirmed. Funk turned back to Auntie Ada, her fury boiling over. "How dare you? You're supposed to be someone we trust, someone who looks after our children. You're a predator, Ada." Auntie Ada, cornered and visibly shaken, tried to compose herself. "Funk, Don't listen to this girl. She's lying. You all know me. I've lived here for years. I'm not capable of such things. But the cracks in her facade were evident now. Funk didn't hesitate any longer. She pulled out her phone and dialed the police. Hello? Yes, I need to report a case of child abuse. Please come quickly. As Funk made the call, Amaka's mother, Nena, stepped forward, her voice breaking with emotion. Amaka, is this true? Why didn't you tell me? Amaka sobbed, clutching her mother's wrapper. She said no one would believe me. She said she would hurt me if I told anyone. Nena's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, wailing. Other mothers in the crowd began to look uneasy, casting suspicious glances at Auntie Ada. Some whispered about how their children had acted strangely after visiting her house, that they had brushed it off. The sound of sirens broke through the murmurs of the crowd. A police van pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. One of them, a tall man with a stern face, approached Funk. You reported an incident? He asked. Yes, officer, Funk said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. This woman has been abusing children in the neighborhood. My son and this girl have already spoken up. The officer turned to Auntie Ada. Madam, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. Auntie Ada's face crumpled and she began to plead. Officer, I swear, I'm innocent. These people are lying against me. But the officer didn't waver. He gestured to one of his colleagues. Escort her to the van. As Auntie Ada was led away, the crowd erupted again, this time with anger and accusations. Some shouted insults, while others expressed regret for ignoring signs they now realized were warning flags. Funk knelt by Tund, who had been standing silently next to her, his small hand gripping her wrapper. She stroked his hair gently. It's over now, Tund. She won't hurt you or anyone else again. The officer returned to Funk and Amaka's mother. We'll need statements from you both and from the children. You can come to the station tomorrow morning. Funk nodded. Thank you, officer. The healing begins. Later that night, Funk sat with Tund on the mat in their small living room. A lantern cast soft shadows on the wall, and the room was silent except for the occasional chirping of crickets outside. Tund, she began softly. I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I should have protected you better. Tund looked up at her, his eyes still heavy with pain. It's not your fault, Mummy. She pulled him close, tears slipping down her cheeks. It will never happen again. I promise. From now on, you can tell me anything, no matter what. For the first time that day, Tund smiled faintly and leaned into her embrace. The next morning, Funk and Nena went to the police station with their children. The officers handled the situation with care, arranging for counselors to speak with Tund and Amaka. News of Auntie Ada's arrest spread quickly, and more parents came forward, recounting odd stories about their children's interactions with her. By evening, 3 more families had lodged complaints. The community, once fragmented, came together with a new resolve. A neighborhood meeting was called, and discussions about safeguarding children became the focus. One of the elders, Baba Oho, stood to address the gathering. We failed our children, he said gravely. We trusted someone without questioning, and now we are paying the price. But this must never happen again.
The community agreed to establish a child protection committee. They decided to conduct background checks on anyone trusted with children, and to educate parents and children about abuse and how to speak up. Weeks turned into months, and Tund began to heal. He attended counseling sessions and found comfort in talking about his feelings with others who had similar experiences. One evening, as Funk prepared dinner, Tund came to her with his schoolwork. Mommy, can you help me with this math question? She looked at him, her heart swelling with pride. He was smiling again tentatively, but genuinely. Of course, my boy, she said, setting the pot aside. Though the scars of the past lingered, the future felt brighter. Funk knew that the pain they had endured would always be a part of their story, but it wouldn't define them. Cliffhanger. A new shadow. Months later, a new family moved into the neighborhood. The wife, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Kioma, quickly became popular for her warm personality and delicious baked goods. She often invited the neighborhood children over for snacks. One day, as Tund played outside with his friends, Mrs. Kioma called to him, "Tund, come and try this cake I just baked." Tund froze, memories flashing in his mind. He shook his head and ran back into the house, his heart racing. Funk, noticing his distress, asked, "Tund, what's wrong?" He hesitated before saying, "Mummy, we should be careful with Mrs. Kioma." Funk's brow furrowed. "Why do you say that?" Tund looked at her, his voice steady but laced with caution. "I don't know. I just feel like we should." Funk's chest tightened as she pulled Tund close. She made a mental note to keep a watchful eye. The past had taught her that vigilance was not just a lesson, it was a duty. The new shadow. Life in the neighborhood began to settle back into its usual rhythm. But the arrival of Mrs. Kioma and her family brought a subtle shift. She was a charming woman in her mid-30s, always smiling and ready to help. Her husband, Mr. Obina, worked in Lagos during the week, leaving Kioma alone with their two young daughters most of the time. It wasn't long before Mrs. Kioma began to integrate herself into the community. She would bring cakes and chin-chin to neighborhood meetings, offer to babysit when parents needed help, and even started hosting small gatherings for the children. "She's so nice," one of the mothers said to Funk one afternoon at the market. "Not everyone would bake for the whole street just for fun. You should let Tund go and play at her house like the other children. It's good for him." Funk forced a smile but said nothing. Tund's words still echoed in her mind. "We should be careful with Mrs. Kioma."